Excellent. Let's do that. All right. Well, so we're at 8 o'clock. So we're going to kick it off. I am Sabrina Merlot from Open Source Medical Supplies. We're here with a group of folks from M19 Collective in India to talk about their current work dealing with the COVID-19 surge in India currently, and specifically the oxygen crisis in the clinical care settings. So why don't we start with some introductions? If Vaibhav and Richa, you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Richa. I am the managing partner at Makers Asylum. Vaibhav, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Vaibhav Chabra. I'm the founder and chief learning officer at Makers Asylum, and a mechanical engineer.
And Anul?
Yeah, hey, I'm maker at large at the Makers Asylum. I've been around since inception, but among other things, I'm also part of the Hackaday team, part of the Makers Asylum team, and part of a maker groups. So, yeah, but I'm more of the engineering kind. So,
great. Okay, so if you guys could, the rest of us on this call, we've got some folks from Open Source Medical Supplies. I see Christina Cole.
Yes. Hi, I'm Christina Cole. I'm head of documentation at Open Source Medical Supplies.
And David DeWert.
Hi, I'm David DeWert, and initiated the International COVID Local Makers Group, which we're partners with the M19 Coalition.
Great. And Katie Emmerich. Katie's, I don't know if you're young.
Hey there. I'm Katie Emmerich. I'm the community data management lead for Open Source Medical Supplies, and I also help run the Facebook platform for OSMS.
Sure. And I wanted to also do a shout out to Jerome Lee. Jerome well, Jerome, introduce yourself, but you've been acting in a way as an advisor for Open Source Medical Supplies of late. Oh, he went.
Physician at Mass General in Boston. Can you guys hear me? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I also co-lead the biomedical crisis team for our system here. So happy to help in any way.
It's great to have you. All right, so let's go over to M19 and Makers Asylum. So you guys, can you explain a little bit about what is M19 Collective and what is happening? What are you doing? What are you working on? Oh, Vaibhav just dipped.
Sorry, no, it's just it's thundering and raining over here, so you will hear a lot of thunders while we speak. So just making sure that everything is intact. So because
I think the transformer outside is also
lightning. Everything.
I was just going to warn that we might drop out for a while because of the thunderstorm. So
yes,
it's getting electric out here.
So just to answer your question, Sabrina, I'll take that quickly.
Yep.
I think, So hi, everyone who's joined this call. So Makers Asylum is a community makerspace in India. We started about 7 to 8 years ago out of a little garage in Mumbai, and later slowly have been growing the maker community and the culture in the country. We last year started something called the M19 Initiative, which was focused around supporting the healthcare workers. We are making PPE, especially face shields. We were able to sort of create a distributed network and open source the design to 42 cities, towns, and villages. We were able to make about 1 million of them in 49 days in the last year. And this year we've reinitiated the initiative around solving the oxygen problem in India. So we're doing on the same principles. We are working around the distributed manufacturing and the open sourcing of the designs for the oxygen concentrators that we're making at the moment, which is based out of a US-based design, open source design called OxyKit. But we're using indigenous materials and parts to reconfigure it in locally available ways so that more and more local community labs, small and large manufacturers as well can take the knowledge and make more of these as quickly and in parallel as we can.
Yeah, a lot of there are a bunch of engineering problems to it as well coming from the US side, which is, of course, the humidity levels in India, things like that we're trying to tackle at the moment. Looking at the locally available resources like zeolites and other things which are available over here, and then using all of that to be able to scale it at large and managing the quality standards across the community labs in India. So we already have over 100 labs that have joined, over 500 people who have joined as part of the collective. And every day, more and more people are getting in. We've been having regular calls, and I think about 11 labs now are in advanced stages of their prototypes. And we're sort of sharing data, understanding how we can optimize our machines so that we can experiment rapidly in a decentralized manner and learn together. And Anul, of course, has been leading the engineering for not just Makers Asylum, but for the entire collective. And we're all learning as we're going. Nobody is an expert here, but at the same time, it's been a very exciting way. Maybe Anul can chip in on that part.
Yeah, we've had to learn things rather quickly. I think it's about a week ago, we didn't know much about how the O2 concentrator works. Last year, we did try to make one, but we sort of didn't commit ourselves to it, not foreseeing the problem that we have now. But as of now, as Vaibhav said, we managed to kind of locally replicate the oxykit design. It's a very common design. The pressure swing absorption is nothing new. But India has special challenges right now, especially with respect to temperature and humidity being a rather vexing problem. Humidity in particular, because that immediately kills the zeolite, which is kind of the heart of the machine. So we're having some really big challenges tackling that. I mean, as of now, most of the coastal places in India have about 70–80% humidity, and controlling that is a big issue. One of the other, let's say, drawbacks of the oxykit is the lack of sensors. So that's the other thing that we're trying to add some more electronics to gauge what's the oxygen concentration, what's the flow rate, and so on, and make it more kind of user-friendly on the field. So these are the challenges we are working on.
And not to add that India is once again under a lockdown, so that means sourcing is again a nightmare, just as last year. So finding things, opening up shops, requesting, begging people to get us the materials as fast as possible, and then the logistics of all of that in Goa, which is also quite a fun experience, to say the least.
So how many of the teams, I mean, of the network, how many actual concentrators are being built? I mean, are people in various stages of builds across all of them? Is the goal for every one of them to be actually at least building one, if not getting into more?
Yeah.
So maybe Richa, you want to answer that along with how the SMEs this year are getting involved?
Yeah, so the way that we've sort of, last year, of course, it was largely makerspaces and community organizations that came in on board to do the PPEs. They were simpler designs, but this time we also have small and large manufacturers who've also come in to be part of the larger open source community that we're developing. So at the moment, there are about 125 registered labs or organizations, I would say. And I think from my last update, I know that over 20 prototypes are already in action in the last week. And there are about 15 to 20 of them that are also in the process of acquiring materials and making. And a lot of them are also sort of parallelly figuring out sourcing locally and things like that. So all of this is in action at the moment. So on the advanced level, I think we have about 10 prototypes, which are almost at the lab testing stages and possibly getting into clinical trials at the moment as we speak. And from a point of view of the fact that each lab is going to make one or many, as part of the larger agenda that we've put, we ourselves are raising funds for about 2,900 units, which is about 100 units per state in India. There are about 29 states in India. And we are hoping to distribute them via these labs in that region. So we're hoping at least about 10 units per lab in the least, if not more.
That's just to be able to ignite the fire, as I would call it, to help them start making and give them the initial seed, basic money to allow them to make the first 5–10 units. Because once they start doing that, they'll all have the confidence to be able to not just scale faster, but at the same time do more. And that's what we saw last year. Making the first few is the hardest, and getting together the funds for that is the hardest. So that's where we think that we can support the entire, not just raise funds for us, but at the same time support the entire collective that way, so that all the advanced stages labs are able to get started and share more.
Okay, so one of the big, I have two questions about where you're at on this. One is if you could share a little bit more about if you're working with clinicians or government, like, so there's development and work. I'm assuming you're getting into testing. I mean, to get these concentrators into actual application, what is the path? Because that's often for open source in medical world, can be a big hurdle. So are you working in concert with clinicians? Like, how is that happening?
So to that point, actually, Sabrina, what we understand from the ground, from the doctors and the hospitals, that because this is not an invasive device, the oxygen concentrator, like a ventilator, it's not an invasive device. So the ethics committee of the hospitals have an independence to take a call on whether they want to adopt it or not. But at the same time, we're also trying to work with a accelerated body with the Drug Control of India to get these tested if in a rapid fashion. So we are in touch parallelly, but what I do understand is that they do have independence to also take a call, because this is not an invasive device.
And there are a lot of doctors and clinicians on the groups that we're talking. So not just from India, from everywhere in the world, who have been spending their time to be able to give us feedback and give us advice on each part of it. And apart from that, we have hospitals like Manipal and a few others that are lined up to immediately start testing them the moment
the lab results.
we are sending it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe you could then get into telling us a little bit more about what you're discovering. I mean, we've seen a lot in the OSMS Facebook group, people sharing links to designs for oxygen concentrators. I think, like, from my point of view, watching, I think the question is, I haven't seen anyone move from the build into the application. Obviously, there's a big window there around testing and QA. And so maybe you could share a bit about, it sounds like you're at the point where you have a machine running in your facility that I think you're going to give us a tour of, or at least give us a glimpse of. But maybe you could share a little bit about that quality assurance process.
So in terms of the quality assurance and the quality check process, because obviously we do want the outputs to be a certain level, specifically because it's going to be on patients, especially in the critical care kind of setup. So what we're trying to also do is have certain local manufacturers also provide to the collective. So there are multiple things in it, like there's pneumatics, there's a compressor, there's zeolite. So how do we standardize these components and have that accessible to the collective is also a large piece of what we're trying to do, which hopefully can also then be in sync with the knowledge sharing and the documentation, so that there's a stepwise process engineering that is put together so that you can make it anywhere. But these are, again, like work in progress at the moment, because our first priority has been to get the unit up and running and tested and all of that kind of stuff. But we do have certain things in the back end that we're trying to collect. For example, very comprehensive data of the construction of the device from each lab in terms of the exact components used, where they've sourced it from, what are the outputs coming in, so sort of have that data sheet so that everyone can also compare from a testing perspective. But we also have information about the source from where the components are coming from, so that, that can also be verified and tested.
And over here, this is actually a very interesting point, and I think Anu can also add over here. We would love your advice as well over here in the longer run, because this is something that I think last year as well, when we were part of OSMS, I think these conversations have started, but not really led to a conclusive result as to how do you manage QC across the country, different labs. And I think it's a great time to also relook at that problem and see if there are certain possible ways that we can sort of tackle this and then tackle it together in India and use that as a larger case in the future to be able to solve it other places as well. And we're working with a few professors as well, like Professor Jaideep and Professor Neil from Professor Neil, I guess you guys might know from MIT, Professor Neil. And then, so on the 18th, again, we have a scheduled call with them. Fab Foundation is officially on board. And then Professor Jaideep is from Cambridge University. He's also working with us on the same to be able to tackle the QA, QC thing. So I think it's a very exciting time to have this conversation and get some of the academicians also involved.
Yeah, a new level of distributed manufacturing, like, right? Like you're at the point where this is not theoretical. Like,
so the challenge is balancing between uniformity across designs, but at the same time allowing enough freedom that you can use local sourcing. So that's a fine kind of balancing act that we're trying to work on right now. I think the documentation team is going to be the most important factor in this whole thing about how we can make sure that we document everything well enough that anyone can make it, but make it to the standards that is expected from a device like this. So engineering could be done, but I think documentation is going to be an important step further.
and that is happening in some ways. The documentation is reflecting the distributed nature of the builds and the testing. So it's
Absolutely.
certainly like a herding cats exercise, I'm guessing.
Right. Yep. That's true.
What are you, so in terms of actual application and what's your sense of the pathway, you guys, until adoption and these are in use?
So I think in terms of the pathway, because of the fact that it's such a big crisis at the moment in India, and a lot of it is to do with supply chain, and hence a lot of people that did not get the thought of distributed manufacturing and decentralization last year are now talking about it, at least trying to understand it, is quite an exciting time for that, because I think because if you think about it, the cities in India will get fixed. I mean, or the oxygen problem, just like we saw every other problem, will go away even in India in a matter of maybe a few weeks to a month maximum, but it will go away. That's we know that. We've seen that before and we understand that. But what's different this time is that just like face shields, just like PPE that became a sort of a consumer item, we're also seeing how oxygen concentrators, people are buying them and keeping them at home just in case. And it's becoming sort of that consumer item in that way. So what's also going to happen is that people in the villages of India will not be able to afford that if it is imported from the United States or China or from the UK or anywhere else. And we've seen that again before as well. So I think the decentralized approach, the thought of sharing the knowledge to not just buy and sell, but to be able to create these is much more powerful in that way, because you're not only just sending somebody in a village a ventilator or a oxygen concentrator, but you're giving them the skills to be able to know how to run them, how to make them, how to fix them, how to use locally available materials to be able to create more for their own village. And I think that's what's really, really powerful over here. And it's very important to be able to do that. And now is a great time, because with that distributed network, we can do that. And if you're able to sort of disseminate that knowledge, it's going to be much more powerful and create that, because automatically a network is forming very, very rapidly. If you're able to provide them the right kind of information, if we're all sort of working together, which we are at the moment, this will become a great use case of distributed manufacturing. That's what's also very, very important to sort of take from that part.
Are there other products or other approaches that are starting to glom on to this oxygen focus? Is there an actual renewed PPE or other medical supply production happening in addition?
Yes. So again, PPEs are back in demand. Face shields, everything is again back in demand in India. Respirators, other masks, N95s, everything is gone back up and is having a spike because people are now back to buying them and hoarding them, because in the middle, nobody was wearing a mask and now everyone's back to it.
Yeah, but in terms of a couple of other use cases for the open source community as well, there was another problem that we sort of chanced upon a couple of weeks back, is that while there are oxygen cylinders in the hospitals, which are getting, sent to them, but because they're industrial grade oxygen, the flow meter does not work when you're putting it on the patient. So most of them have become unusable because of lack of flow meters and regulators over there. So what we've also done with another group is that there's a parallel stream under the M19 Collective, which is working on these flow meters, which are 3D printed and CNC machined. So that again, through the distributed network, they can be locally made and given it to the hospitals where they don't have access to these flow meters as well. So we're doing it's just not the concentrator. Obviously, we will it's the larger oxygen problem. So we have to sort of work around multiple other solutions, which are also coming in on board apart from the concentrator. So that's what we also try to sort of facilitate.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on the regulator part for the cylinders. I think about 500 or 1,000 have already been made and being used in the field. So that has already been a sub-project that has been pretty successful in the collective.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to add to one of the prior questions was, how where we slot in, because there are two things here. One is the use of these concentrators can reduce the burden on the existing infrastructure. So there are many cases where patients need to be weaned away from oxygen. And if they're already using hospital resources to do that, it kind of takes away the use of that facility from other more serious users. So the oxygen concentrator can step in there as a midway path for those who have been advised to, let's say, wean away either at home or out of the ICU in an hospital, for example. The other thing we have seen is that a lot of what we know as what we call as recreational oxygen concentrators have been coming in here. And unfortunately, they are not rated for either use in terms of medical, and they are also not environmentally suitable for the kind of situation we are in. So a lot of them die down because of the high humidity here. Or even if they do work, they are at best rated for things like 5 liters per minute or about 80-90% oxygen, which in any case doesn't really help a COVID patient per se. So we're kind of seeing the oxykit as being, some kind of a gap between these two situations.
So just to be super explicit, so do you think in this window before the supply chain reconstitutes itself, right? And things reconcile, do you feel like there will be a clinical application of the design that you guys are working through before that window closes? Or do you feel like this is a longer game solution that you're pushing through?
No, I definitely think this is going to be a solution that's going to be able to be implemented, because one, like Anul mentioned, the oxykits that are being imported are not working. So that means that they're not adjusted to the humidity conditions in India. One. Second, the flow rates are too low. So this kind of a product is going to be required. We have what we see on ground at the end of the day. Like I said, this is something that might just also take off in a consumer-centric manner where people are actually buying them, keeping them at home. So there will be a longer product cycle to something like this compared to what we saw last year with ventilators, for example. It's going to be more like the face shield, I would suggest, than the ventilator, but somewhere over there in the middle. Another thing is going to be that the moment, I don't want to say this, but at the same time, while India is facing this, there are a few other countries that are behind and might also end up having some problems going forward. And there are other countries which are not prepared for this. And Tobias actually very nicely pointed some of them out last year, but did some very exciting research on that as well. And full credits to him on that. Because of him only, we were able to have some information last year before we completely dived into it. Because if we wouldn't have done our research last year, it would have been impossible for us to dive in right at the beginning and have the confidence about it. So the point being that there is a lot of other countries that might also face this issue, which have different climate conditions, which have different voltages, powers, everything compared to the United States or to China or other places. So to be able to use this and be able to use in India as a use case, and then provide that information to more people on how this can be documented and done better. So I think Anul can also talk a little bit about OxyCode if he would like to. But the documentation of OxyCode needs to be improved, honestly.
Yeah.
That's one thing, which is something that we all agree with. Ed has done some amazing, amazing work on the OxyCode designs. And I think best person to comment on that would be Anul over there as well. But at the same time,
yeah, go ahead, Baba.
But I think when it comes to the documentation part, a lot of more work is required over there to be able to make it so that people can really understand why is what happening, and to be able to recreate it. Right now, it's been done from the standpoint of you buy the kit and you make it again, but it's not done from the standpoint of how do you understand how this thing works and what are the parameters that you can play with to be able to improve work with the design and be able to create it locally. It's not done from that perspective, and that's something that needs to be done. But yes, Anul.
Yeah,
Is
just
that
to
what-
add to that. Sorry,
Go ahead, Anil. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just to add to that, besides the OxyCode, we've been looking at other designs as well. There's, for example, Project Apollo, which is also equally well designed. So there's a couple of designs around them. We're trying to see how best we can, accommodate features from one and use them here. So that's one aspect. The other is we're running a lot of several sub projects here locally. So we've kind of formed task groups to do certain things like, creating a black box controller for an oxygen concentrator. And that's a common thing. It needs certain inputs, output sensors and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of folks, building the device that does that. Or one of the most important requirements with the O2 concentrator is measurement of the concentration itself. So the sensors, sensor kit or the sensor design needs to be incorporated. The OxyKit doesn't have that. So that's a big shortcoming that needs to be added. Without that, we just can't put this in the field at all, no matter how hard we try. So these are some of the things that, in terms of safety, for example, or control, or, ease of use, user interface. A lot of the engineering guys have broken off into subgroups and, working on them to sort of solve these as soon as we can.
That's great. Yeah, I can imagine that's an enormous project management task in terms of trying to coordinate these distributed teams into focused pods to solve some of these product problems, right? It's a whole product.
Right.
And do you have, so I guess that's a question, David, you wanted to go ahead and pose your question around
Sure.
Support.
Yeah, so financially, how much do you want to raise? And you want to make mention of the vehicle that you have for raising it. And also, what other kinds of supports would you like to see from the international community? It sounds like you've got great connections with technical medical advisors. Are there other kinds of supports that would be helpful for you to have that you'd like to see us perhaps point you to?
So Anul can talk about the engineering side as to how
but
we
I
can
think
start with
Richard
that.
can fill in on the most of the other stuff that answers this question though.
Anul, you want to go ahead with the engineering asks?
Yeah, okay. So on the engineering ask, there's a couple of things that we can really help with. One is, of course, and we are already talking to a few, but we still don't have a good handle on what makes a PSA tick, and that's really the heart of the matter. In the sense that if you change parameter X, how does that affect the machine? Or if you change parameter Y, what happens? So these are questions that, if there's someone who knows these systems, I mean, right now we can tweak it around based on guesses and logic, maybe thinking, but if someone already has these answers, that can help. The other thing would be in sourcing. For example, some of the key sourcing bottlenecks we have right now is sourcing compressors, for example, which are oil-free, and the raw material that goes in the seal, that's the zeolite. These are the two pain points that any help that we can get is going to be really useful at this point in time. So we have some bottlenecks on sourcing that we would really like help with. And on the engineering side, it would be helpful if we can get a good grip on how a PSA system works and how to tune it. We have, on the engineering side, we have a simulation that was built for another system for the project Apollo, which is a Python-based program that lets you, run a few parameters and output plots on how your system will respond. So you don't have to physically model it all the time. You can kind of do it on your computer and then hopefully translate that to real world. But these are things that, like I said, we are no experts here. I mean, we haven't worked with PSA systems before. So if there's people who know how these things work and they can help us, that would be really helpful.
That's we will push out those asks. And Vaibhav and Richa, did you want to give a more programmatic view on needs?
Yeah, for sure. So from a perspective of at least the minimum pilot that we want to really realize with this distributed network is about, which I said earlier as well, was about 2,900 to 3,000 units. So about 100 units per state in India is what we're trying to sort of achieve. And per unit cost of this is coming up to between a $500 to a $700 mark. So that's what we're looking at. So if we multiply it only from a material and the making perspective, it comes to about a $1.1 million kind of a larger budget that we're trying to raise in terms of how we can do this pilot across board in the country, including multiple labs, and how this decentralized network could really be funded in this, at least with seed money for about, say, 5 to 10 units, so that most of these local labs can really start making them. Plus, of course, there's a knowledge management that is going on at the back end, which is going to be around the documentation, the translation, understanding the QA, QC, what is going out, technical support that would be needed on ground, and execution on that level. So a larger plan of action is for 2,900 units for about $1 million is what we're sort of looking to raise. Of course, we also, from a channel of raising in the United States, we have the Fab Foundation on board. So the Fab Foundation has the initiative on their website. So you can go to the Fab Foundation official website. They have a PayPal link. They do also have a direct outreach email where you can reach out for larger funding if there is opportunity as well over there. So the Fab Foundation will then help us route those funds to the labs in India as well. So for the United States and other countries as well, Fab Foundation could be the channel via which we could raise the funding.
And in the UK as well, there are a few other organizations possibly coming on board. So we have EUREI and a few others, the European Union. And what they're trying to do is looking at an aspect in which we could adopt labs. So the point is within the M19 Collective, if we can fund specific labs that are doing well and reimburse them some money so that they have. So at the moment, honestly, because of most of the guys who are building them, they're just spending out of their own pockets and with all whatever they have. And these are all maker spaces and fab labs, and we know how they run. So just being able to give them that $1,000 or $2,000 to be able to really prototype it and take it forward is a big help to all of these labs. They will just do more. And that's the beauty of the maker spaces across the world, right? And that's what we're asking for. Is while the labs are trying to raise some money themselves, we're trying to see if we can raise money for the M19 Collective and then distribute it to all the labs.
Yeah.
And that's what we're raising for.
Because, I mean, just from all our conversations last year, we all know that the funding has been a massive question, right? Mm-hmm. And people start losing funding very soon, very quickly in these open source communities. And we've seen that not only in India, but in all parts of the world. And we've all had this conversation. So we really want to keep that piece of the project also very on high priority, because I think the motivation, the need of the hour, all of that is of course in sync with the funding. So it's important that whether there are large donations going in across the world in multiple $1 million, I think a $1 million funding is not a very large sum to really look at this distributed network and support them.
Is the government, I mean, this question of, okay, we ride an emergency tide and the distributed network pops up out of the generosity of the people, you know, involved. We have done some post analysis around the maker COVID response, and, you know, wrote some policy papers and recommendations around formalizing these networks to support them so that they can respond as prototypers and problem solvers when the global supply chain breaks down. How are you guys seeing, I mean, are you, you know, you're in the middle of crisis again. So the attention, you have the attention, right? The attention will go away as soon as the supply chain resolves itself. So how do we take advantage of, like, how do we push this further to actually land a more supported and formalized version of this solution network without in some ways burdening the network with too much bureaucracy and too much formality, right? Like that's the challenge with the maker community in some ways, is like that tension between the autonomous, you know, problem solver, and then this aspect of it being like, you know, how can you, what compromise can you make to be more supported? So I'm curious if what you guys, your thoughts on that.
I think the best person in this entire group to be able to answer that is you. And you're asking the question.
That's not true.
David's raising his hand.
Yeah, no, I'm working on that, and I don't quite have the answer either, but there are mutual aid networks, there are local cooperatives, there are local financial structures that have been set up in many places in the world, and they're designed and able, because they're locally resourced, to respond quickly to local needs. So to me, the longer term answer is in that kind of thing. Yes, it's wonderful when government and state, you know, become involved and set up a program, as in some countries they have. You know, I know France is now presently, according to our friends in France, really thinking about that and the extension of these local maker hubs into other countries, especially in the French-speaking world. But it is a persistent trouble. But as our world goes through these shocks, and sadly, this won't be the last one, right? We're going to be together on a call again.
Yes.
You know, the resilience of local communities, their ability to do exactly what you're doing, get together locally to make what's needed, and have a knowledge network that connects, you know, the people in a region, you know, even beyond. I know you've gone beyond the boundaries of India too. There's Nepal and there's neighboring countries facing the same things. This is a very hopeful thing for the world. All the people on this call are part of it, but it's still a problem we haven't worked out. So what you figure out in this crisis, we'll all learn from, right? And hopefully strengthen what we can do in other parts of the world as well.
I want to add actually.
Anul has a comment. Let me give it the floor to Anul really quick.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Very quickly, one of the things we realized during this phase of our work is that we are no longer limited to makers joining us. So since we now have people from industry joining in, and unfortunately, they most often have no clue about how open source works. So some of the things that the team here has been working on is to create some kind of a charter to make them, understand how the open source economy works, or the open source structure works. Also have something known as, which is what Weber came up with, the open disclosure agreement instead of a non-disclosure, as a part of the central tenet of this work. So we're kind of looking a bit further off into this, but maybe at the current time, it's still work in progress, I guess.
So I just want to add to everyone's point, and I feel that what is super important at this point in time, while we all have the attention again, because this has not happened once, we've done this earlier last year as well as a larger community of people who've come together. I've been showing the output of the reports that OSMS has put together in terms of $200 million, 42,000 responders. I don't know how many million PPEs were sent via the open source network. These are not small numbers. And I think the collective voice of the open source community needs to be put back together in action, because if we're able to prove a high-end product or whatever, or a superior product like an oxygen concentrator can be made locally, and if this pilot sort of can be done in a place like India, which is not even advanced, right? I mean, I think that will itself speak a lot of volume about what the power of the collective intelligence is, why we need to put these, distributed networks together, because at the end of the day, the old ways of functioning is going to, get disrupted no matter what, in the ways that the world is changing. So there are new ways of thinking about problems. There are new ways of solving problems, and open innovation and open health is going to be a real conversation. And how do you really democratize that knowledge to more and more people is going to be very powerful in the short term and the long term future of things.
Just to sort of show you, like, that's what we're talking about, right? How all of this is just the Telegram group that I'm just showing you, hundreds of different prototypes being formed across India as we speak. All that complete sort of people sharing their designs, like every different kinds. There are hundreds of them out there at the moment.
You want to show them our machine?
Yes.
We'll
Yeah.
we'll take you to the lab.
Okay, Anil, you can speak while.
So we have a great location here in Goa. This place you see is over 100 years old. It was built by the Portuguese. So we have a fantastic location here. Kind of just the right kind of space for the different lab setups that we need for electronics and woodworking and stuff like that. So here's the machine right in the background there.
I was just saying it's also leaking right now with all the rains.
No, not sure.
Oh, wow.
Okay, yeah, that's the one that we've been putting together. It's sort of like the test bed right now. It's obviously a little messy, but we've been testing it. I can turn it on.
It looks so mad. That coil just almost makes it look like a classic mad scientist rig, right? Like the cooling coil, it's just almost like a comic book machine.
Yeah, we've tried a lot to try different solutions. We've looked at, vehicle air conditioning evaporator coils, or car radiators, or motorcycle radiators, something that can act as a heat exchanger, because right now our biggest challenge is to cool the compressed air so that we can remove the moisture out of it. Unless we cool it, we can't get the moisture out. So kind of a tricky challenge. Most of the labs are having issues with that. I mean, right now we are hovering around 75% to 80% humidity in Goa, where we are. So not really an easy challenge to do in a low-cost manner. I mean, it can be solved. You can remove 100% of air, moisture from air, but it's going to be expensive. So we have to look at the best way. Go ahead, Weber. Weber, there are two plugs now. So one of them is the compressor. You can just ignore that.
Yeah, it's on.
Awesome.
So it's running right now. You can explain. I can just be on mute.
Okay, so essentially the system is you take pressurized air, make sure it's cool before it enters your sieve chambers, and the property of the zeolite is that that nitrogen atoms stick to it because of its structure, but oxygen atoms kind of filter through. So you kind of pressurize the tank, suck out oxygen from one end, and then release the nitrogen that's collected back and vent it back into open air. So, and then the cycle keeps repeating. So there are two sieves, A and B, and they keep alternating between pressurizing and venting. And that's essentially what a PSA system is. I mean, if you look up Wikipedia, it's a pretty simple description. But the devil is in the details. Tuning it is not easy. Getting the right material is super important, and so on. So I guess at this point, I think.
Do you have any questions for these guys as you're looking at this, being from the clinician point of view?
No, nothing specific. I'm still trying to take it all in.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that this one is completely built using locally sourced parts. So we don't even have the oxykit yet in our hands. It's been shipped from the US, but it's stuck somewhere in Amsterdam right now, I think. So this one, as well as all the other 8 to 10 units that are built across the country in Bombay and Chennai and other places, they were all done using locally sourced parts. So there is a lot of variation between each of these units, depending on what they could find. So we are setting up a system to collate all of the data from all of the systems so we can have numbers, and hopefully that can allow other users to fine tune their systems much faster once they have, you know, the information on hand. So data collection is going to be a big part of our whole exercise here.
Are there other teams building these outside of India that are looped into your data collection and your analysis project, or are you specifically focused and want to stay focused on machines in India?
I think for the short term, yes, we would like to, because it's quite a big task, and we aren't even sure if we would be able to manage it properly. But we just kind of got started on it, so let's see how it goes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. Does anybody else in the room have questions for these guys now around? I feel like we've got a great sort of overview of the whole problem, of your approach, your incredible work. I mean, you guys are a marvel, and you know, my goal is to, you know, again, we'll compile this out, we'll share this out. It looks like the Facebook Live didn't connect, so whatever. We're going to push it out to the groups, we'll push it out through email, and we'll see what we can do around solving for some of the specific engineering asks here, and the fundraising asks. So I guess one other question that always that I've wondered about this and have not been able to follow the thread on hard enough, but like, what about the international aid organizations like World Health, like Global Health, NGOs and things like that? Like, has there been any interest? Are you guys tapped into anybody on that lens, or is it just too far out ahead of how those orgs work?
So Sabrina, on that, I don't think we have like a direct in over there. I think those are like multiple levels of, you know, conversations, people who know people, that kind of conversation. So, I mean, we have two things at hand. One is also the making, which is also very key to this whole process. And the other piece is, of course, the fundraising. So I think as much amplification that can happen through people that we know, I think that will be really appreciated, because it's not, like I said, it's in the larger scheme of things, it's possibly not a lot of money, but in the decentralized network, I think it's an important piece to be funded. So I think that's what I'm telling everyone. And I think this year what's been happening is more and more people are understanding this whole approach for some reason, which is nice, but a lot of them do have the apprehension to bet on this as well. But we know that it will happen in any case. So that's not what we're worried about. But I think we need to find like-minded partners who really will put the money on this, because it's important to do that, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm eager to share the information out and want to again thank you guys for making the time. You guys are doing really important work for us. So for taking an hour and doing this conversation is we're really grateful for it. And we'll follow the thread with Fab Foundation and their work. Please communicate back and keep the OSMS community in the loop, and we'll continue to push it out as well.
Thank you.
All right. Big
Thank
props,
you.
guys.
Thank you,
Amazing.
guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Good night.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Bye.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye.